In the dimly lit corner of a forgotten antique shop, buried beneath layers of dust and time, sat an object that would change everything. Its cold, metallic frame gleamed faintly under the flickering light, as if it had been waiting for the right hands to find it. This was no ordinary camera. It was a Polaroid, old and worn, with a history as dark as the shadows it claimed to capture. The shopkeeper, a frail man with eyes that seemed to hold secrets, whispered a warning as he handed it over. "Be careful," he said, his voice trembling. "This camera doesn't just take pictures, it captures what shouldn't be seen." Enter Detective Eleanor Blake, a woman whose sharp mind and unshakable logic had made her one of the most respected investigators in the region. But beneath her tough exterior lay a past haunted by loss, a loss tied to the very things she refused to believe in: the paranormal, the unexplained, the things that go bump in the night. When she stumbled upon the Polaroid in that dusty shop, it felt like fate, or perhaps a cruel joke. Black Hollow, the town where Eleanor now found herself, was a place shrouded in mystery. Fog clung to the streets like a ghostly blanket, and whispers of strange occurrences were as common as the cobblestones beneath her feet. Yet, no one ever dared to explain them. It was as if the town itself was hiding something dark and ancient. And now, with this eerie camera in her possession, Eleanor was about to uncover the truth, or be consumed by it. What she didn't know yet was that the Polaroid held more than just shadows. It held answers to questions she had been too afraid to ask. But beware, for some shadows are better left unseen. Now turning to the origins of the Polaroid, we uncover the story of its enigmatic creator, Victor Holloway, a reclusive inventor with a mind as sharp as the shadows he sought to capture. Holloway vanished without a trace decades ago, leaving behind only whispers of his experiments. The camera, with its cold, unyielding metal casing and intricate engravings that seemed to shift under the light, was his final creation, a device born from his obsession with the boundary between life and death. Rumors swirled about how the camera ended up in that dusty antique shop. Some said it was found in the ruins of Holloway's workshop, hidden beneath piles of charred notes and broken equipment. Others claimed it had been passed down through generations, each owner meeting an untimely end. What was undeniable, however, was its connection to a series of unsolved deaths in Black Hollow. Each victim had been linked to the camera in some way, their stories ending in silence and shadows. The camera itself seemed alive, its lens glinting like a watchful eye. Those who dared to use it spoke of faint whispers that echoed in the stillness, as if the device carried the voices of those it had captured. The Polaroid didn't just take pictures, it trapped something. Something that lingered in the edges of the frame, waiting to be seen. And now, in the hands of Detective Eleanor Blake, it was about to reveal its darkest secrets. Now turning to Detective Blake's first encounter with the Polaroid, we find her standing in the dimly lit living room of her childhood home. The air feels heavy, as if the walls themselves are holding their breath. She hesitates for a moment, the cold weight of the camera in her hands, before raising it to her eye. The click of the shutter echoes through the empty space, and the camera spits out a photo. She watches as the image slowly develops, her heart pounding in her chest. At first, the picture seems ordinary, just the empty room, bathed in shadows. But then her breath catches. In the corner of the frame, barely visible, is a figure, a shadowy outline, faint but unmistakable, standing where no one had been moments before. Her hands tremble as she studies the photo, her mind racing. The figure's posture, the tilt of its head, it's familiar, too familiar. "Marcus," she calls out, her voice tight with unease. Her partner, Officer Marcus Reed, steps into the room, his expression a mix of curiosity and concern. "Look at this," she says, thrusting the photo toward him. He takes it, squinting at the image. "What am I supposed to be seeing?" he asks, his tone skeptical. "There," she points, her finger hovering over the shadowy figure. "Don't you see it? It's him. It's my father." Marcus frowns, shaking his head. "Blake, come on. It's just a trick of the light. You've been under a lot of stress lately. Maybe you're seeing things that aren't there." But Blake isn't convinced. She can't shake the feeling that the figure is real, that it's watching her. Her father had died under mysterious circumstances years ago, and now here he was, or at least his shadow. The room feels colder, the air thicker, as if the past is pressing in on her. As the night wears on, Blake can't stop staring at the photo. The shadow seems to shift, ever so slightly, when she looks away and back again. She tries to tell herself it's her imagination, but deep down, she knows better. The Polaroid has captured something that shouldn't exist, and now it's reaching out to her. With the next phase of the journey in sight, Blake's unease grows. The shadows in the photos are no longer just images, they're messages, and they're only just beginning to speak. Now turning to the growing phenomenon, Detective Blake finds herself caught in a web of shadows that refuse to stay still. Every photo she takes with the Polaroid reveals more of these eerie figures, each one tied to an unsolved death in Black Hollow. The shadows don't just linger in the background, they seem to shift, their forms twisting and turning when she looks away and back again. It's as if they're alive, trapped within the confines of the photograph, desperate to be seen. Late one night, as Blake sits alone in her dimly lit apartment, she notices something new. The whispers, at first, they're faint, almost imperceptible, like the rustle of leaves in the wind. But as she stares at the photos spread across her table, the whispers grow louder, more insistent. They are not words, not yet, just sounds, fragmented and haunting. She feels a chill run down her spine, the kind that tells her she's no longer alone. The shadows in the photos seem to respond to the whispers, their movements becoming more deliberate. One figure, a tall, gaunt shadow with its head tilted unnaturally, points toward the edge of the frame. Another, a smaller, hunched figure, appears to be reaching out, its hand blurred as if in motion. Blake can't shake the feeling that they're trying to tell her something, to guide her toward a truth she's not ready to face. Her investigation leads her to Margaret Dawes, a local historian who has spent decades studying the history of Black Hollow. Margaret is a woman of sharp intellect and guarded demeanor, her knowledge of the town's dark past as deep as the shadows in Blake's photos. When Blake shows her the Polaroid images, Margaret's reaction is telling, a flicker of recognition, a tightening of her lips. "You've seen these before," Blake says, her voice steady but probing. Margaret hesitates, her eyes darting to the photos before she speaks. "Victor Holloway," she says finally, her tone low and measured. "He was obsessed with the idea of capturing life after death. This camera, it was his greatest creation and his greatest mistake." Blake leans in, her curiosity piqued. "What do you mean, a mistake?" Margaret's gaze hardens, and for a moment, she seems to weigh her words carefully. "Let's just say," she begins, her voice barely above a whisper, "that some doors are better left unopened." As Blake leaves Margaret's home, The weight of her words lingers. The shadows in the photos seem to grow darker, their whispers louder, as if they sense her growing determination. The next chapter of this mystery is unfolding, and Blake knows she's only scratching the surface. The shadows are speaking, and she's starting to listen. Now turning to the secrets Margaret Dawes holds, Detective Blake finds herself standing at the edge of a truth far darker than she ever imagined. The conversation between the two women is charged with tension, each word carefully chosen, each silence heavy with unspoken fears. Margaret's home is cluttered with books and artifacts, the air thick with the scent of old paper and dust. She sits across from Blake, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes avoiding the photos spread out on the table between them. "You know more than you're letting on," Blake says, her voice firm but not unkind. "These shadows, they're not just random. They're connected to something bigger, aren't they?" Margaret exhales slowly, her gaze finally meeting Blake's. "Victor Holloway," she begins, her voice trembling slightly, "was a man consumed by his own ambition. He believed he could capture the essence of life after death, that he could trap the soul within a photograph. This camera," she gestures to the Polaroid, "was his masterpiece, but it was also his downfall." Blake leans forward, her curiosity sharpening. "What do you mean, his downfall?" Margaret's eyes darken as she recalls the past. Victor's experiments, they weren't just about capturing images. He wanted to trap souls, to hold them in place, to study them. He believed he could control death itself, but the souls, they fought back. They weren't meant to be confined, and the camera, it became a prison. As Margaret speaks, Blake's mind races with images of Victor Holloway, hunched over his workbench, his hands trembling as he adjusted the camera's mechanisms. She sees him in a dimly lit room, surrounded by photographs of shadowy figures, their faces twisted in agony. The air is thick with the scent of chemicals, the sound of faint whispers echoing in the background. Victor's obsession grows, his experiments becoming more reckless, more dangerous. He disappeared. Margaret continues, her voice barely above a whisper. "One day he was just gone, but the camera remained, and the shadows, they never left." Blake feels a chill run down her spine as she processes Margaret's words. The shadows in the photos seem to shift, their movements more pronounced, their whispers growing louder. She can almost hear them now, faint but insistent, like a distant echo. "What happened to the souls?" Blake asks, her voice barely audible. Margaret's expression hardens, her lips pressing into a thin line. "They're still there," she says, her tone grim. "Trapped, waiting, and now they're trying to reach out." The weight of Margaret's words hangs in the air, the room suddenly feeling colder, darker. Blake knows she's only scratched the surface of this mystery, but the pieces are starting to come together. The shadows, the whispers, the camera, they're all connected, and the truth is far more terrifying than she ever imagined. As Blake leaves Margaret's home, the night feels heavier, the shadows deeper. She can't shake the feeling that she's being watched, that the shadows are following her. The next morning, she receives a call that sends a jolt of dread through her. Margaret Dawes has been found dead in her home, her body lying beside a single Polaroid photo. The image shows her shadow, frozen in time, its hand reaching out as if trying to escape the frame. The whispers grow louder, the shadows closer, and Blake knows she's running out of time. Now turning to the shadows' warning, the photos taken with the Polaroid begin to change in ways that send a shiver down Detective Blake's spine. The shadowy figures, once static and distant, now seem to move with purpose. Their forms stretch and twist, their hands reaching out as if trying to grasp something or someone. Some of the shadows point toward specific locations in Black Hollow, their gestures deliberate, almost urgent. Blake and her partner, Officer Marcus Reed, exchange uneasy glances as they study the photos. The clues are impossible to ignore. The first shadow points toward the old Black Hollow asylum, a crumbling structure on the outskirts of town. Its towering walls and broken windows loom like a specter against the grey sky, a place long abandoned and forgotten. The air grows colder as Blake and Reed approach, the wind carrying faint whispers that seem to echo from the asylum's depths. The gate creaks open with a groan, as if inviting them inside. The interior is a labyrinth of decay. Peeling wallpaper hangs like tattered skin from the walls, and the floorboards groan underfoot. The air is thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something metallic, almost like blood. Blake's flashlight cuts through the darkness, revealing empty rooms filled with rusted bed frames and shattered glass. But it's the silence that unnerves her the most. It's too quiet, as if the asylum itself is holding its breath. As they venture deeper, they stumble upon a hidden room, its door concealed behind a collapsed bookshelf. Inside, the walls are lined with shelves, each one crammed with old Polaroid photos. Blake's breath catches as she picks one up. The image shows a shadowy figure, its face twisted in agony, and on the back, a date is scrawled in faded ink. She flips through more photos, each one revealing a different shadow, each one marked with a date. These are all death dates, Reed says, his voice low. Every single one. Blake's hands tremble as she holds a photo of a shadow reaching out, its fingers clawing at the edge of the frame. The date on the back matches the day Margaret Dawes died. The realization hits her like a punch to the gut. The shadows aren't just trapped, they're trying to communicate. They're pointing to the asylum because this is where it all began. The room feels colder now, the whispers louder. Blake can almost feel the weight of the shadows' desperation, their need to be heard. She looks at Reed, his face pale in the dim light. "We need to find out what happened here," she says, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "This place, it's the key to everything." As they leave the room, the shadows in the photos seem to follow them, their movements more pronounced, their whispers more insistent. The asylum's dark past is calling, and Blake knows they're running out of time to answer. Now turning to the asylum's dark past, the truth begins to unravel like a thread pulled from a frayed tapestry. The Black Hollow Asylum, once a place of supposed healing, had long been a facade for something far more sinister. Victor Holloway, the reclusive inventor of the cursed Polaroid, had chosen this isolated building as the stage for his macabre experiments. The asylum's crumbling walls now hold secrets that even the shadows seem reluctant to reveal. As Blake and Reed delve deeper into the asylum's history, they uncover records hidden in the dusty archives of the town library. The documents paint a chilling picture. Holloway, driven by an obsession with life after death, had used the asylum's patients as unwilling subjects in his experiments. He believed that the Polaroid could capture not just images, but the very essence of a soul. The patients, already vulnerable and forgotten by society, became his test subjects. The experiments were gruesome. Holloway would photograph his subjects in moments of extreme distress, convinced that their heightened emotions would make their souls more visible to the camera. The results were horrifying. The photos revealed shadowy figures, twisted and distorted, as if the souls themselves were in agony. Many of the patients died during these experiments, their deaths marked by the same dates scrawled on the backs of the Polaroids Blake found in the hidden room. A flashback to Holloway's final experiment reveals the depth of his madness. In a dimly lit room within the asylum, he set up the camera on a tripod, its cold metal casing gleaming in the flickering light. He stood before it, his face a mask of determination, and pressed the shutter. The flash illuminated the room, and when the photo developed, it showed Holloway's shadow, but not as it should have been. The shadow was alive, writhing and twisting, as if trying to escape the confines of the image. Moments later, Holloway vanished, leaving behind only the camera and the photo of his trapped shadow. Back in the present, Blake's flashlight catches something glinting on a shelf in the hidden room. She reaches for it, her fingers brushing against the cold metal of an old Polaroid camera. It's identical to the one she's been using, but this one feels heavier, as if it carries the weight of Holloway's sins. She flips through the photos nearby and freezes. There, in one of the images, is Holloway's shadow, still trapped, its hollow eyes staring back at her. The whispers in the room grow louder, almost deafening, as if the shadows are urging her to act. Blake's heart pounds as she realizes the truth. The asylum isn't just the key to understanding the Polaroid, it's the prison where Holloway's experiments began, and where his own soul remains trapped. The shadows are not just victims, they are witnesses, and they are desperate for justice. As Blake and Reed prepare to leave the room, the shadows in the photos seem to shift, their movements more frantic. The asylum's dark past is no longer just a story, it's a living, breathing force, and it's clear that the shadows won't rest until their story is told. The next step in their journey is clear, but the cost of uncovering the truth may be more than either of them is ready to pay. Now turning to the shadows' demand, the eerie presence of the captured figures begins to escalate, their restless energy spilling beyond the confines of the Polaroid photos. Blake, already on edge from the asylum's revelations, finds herself haunted not just by the images, but by the shadows themselves. They invade her dreams, twisting her nights into a labyrinth of fear. She wakes in a cold sweat, the faint whispers from the photos echoing in her ears, as if the shadows are standing just outside her door, waiting. Her paranoia grows with each passing day. The once skeptical detective now jumps at every creak of her floorboards, every flicker of light. She begins to see the shadows in the corners of her vision, fleeting glimpses that vanish when she turns to look. The toll on her mental health is undeniable. Dark circles form under her eyes, and her hands tremble as she flips through the photos, each one a reminder of the horrors she's uncovered. Reed, her ever-loyal partner, notices the change. At first, he dismisses her claims as exhaustion, the result of too many sleepless nights chasing ghosts. But one evening, as they sit in her dimly lit living room, he witnesses something that shakes him to his core. Blake holds up a photo, her voice trembling as she describes the shadow's movements. Reed leans in, skeptical but curious, and then it happens. The shadow in the photo shifts, its arms stretching outward as if reaching for them. Reed stumbles back, his face pale. For the first time, he believes her. The realization hits them both like a thunderclap. The shadows aren't just trapped, they're trying to communicate. Each movement, each whisper, is a desperate plea for justice. The victims of Holloway's experiments, the forgotten souls of the asylum, are crying out for their stories to be heard. Blake and Reed know they can't ignore this call. The shadows are no longer passive observers. They are active participants in this chilling mystery, and they won't rest until their voices are heard. As the weight of this revelation settles over them, the shadows in the photos seem to grow more insistent, their movements sharper, their whispers louder. The next phase of their journey is clear. They must uncover the truth behind each death, no matter how dangerous the path may be. The shadows demand justice, and Blake and Reed are the only ones who can deliver it. But as they prepare to take the next step, a chilling thought lingers in the air. What if the shadows' demands come at a cost neither of them is ready to pay? Now turning to the next phase of their investigation, Blake and Reed dive deeper into the tangled web of deaths connected to the Polaroid. Each victim, they soon discover, shares a chilling link, either to Victor Holloway himself or to the asylum where his experiments took place. The pattern is undeniable, and it points to something far darker than they initially imagined. Their first stop is the homes of the victims' surviving family members. These interviews are emotionally charged, filled with grief and lingering fear. One by one, the families reveal a disturbing truth. Holloway had been blackmailing them. He threatened to expose their darkest secrets unless they remained silent about his work. Some families were too terrified to speak out, while others tried to resist, only to face tragic consequences. The weight of these revelations hangs heavy in the air, as Blake and Reed realize the extent of Holloway's manipulation. But the most shocking discovery comes when they uncover the name Edward Hastings. A wealthy businessman with a reputation for philanthropy, Hastings had secretly funded Holloway's experiments. The deeper they dig, the more it becomes clear that Hastings wasn't just a financier. He may have orchestrated the deaths to cover up Holloway's work. The evidence is circumstantial, but the pieces fit too well to ignore. Blake decides to confront Hastings directly. The meeting takes place in his sprawling mansion, a stark contrast to the grim reality of his actions. The tension is palpable as Blake lays out her findings, her voice steady but laced with accusation. Hastings, at first, maintains his composure, dismissing her claims as baseless. But as Blake presses him, his facade begins to crack. His eyes dart nervously, and his answers grow evasive. The confrontation reaches its peak when Blake reveals a Polaroid photo she found among Holloway's belongings. A photo of Hastings standing beside the inventor, their faces grim. Hastings freezes, his carefully constructed mask slipping away. For a moment, the room is silent, the air thick with unspoken truths. Then, with a trembling voice, Hastings admits to funding Holloway's experiments, but denies any involvement in the deaths. Blake isn't convinced. She knows there's more to the story, and she's determined to uncover it. As she and Reed leave the mansion, the shadows in the photos seem to grow more restless, their whispers louder, as if urging them to keep going. The truth is within reach, but so is the danger, and as they prepare to take the next step, one question lingers in their minds. What will it cost to bring justice to the shadows of the dead? Now turning to the final confrontation, Blake and Reed return to Edward Hastings' mansion, this time armed with the Polaroid and a plan. The air is thick with tension as they step inside, the weight of the shadows' whispers pressing down on them. Blake wastes no time, confronting Hastings with the damning photo of him and Holloway. His initial calm demeanor falters, his hands trembling as he tries to dismiss the evidence. But Blake isn't backing down. She pulls out the Polaroid, its cold metal casing glinting in the dim light. Without a word, she snaps a photo of Hastings. The room falls silent as the image slowly develops. At first, it appears normal, just Hastings standing there, his face pale and drawn. But then, something shifts. His shadow begins to twist and contort, stretching unnaturally across the floor. The figure in the photo morphs into something monstrous, its features grotesque and menacing. Hastings stares at the image, his breath quickening, his composure shattered. The shadow in the photo seems to move, its hollow eyes locking onto Hastings. He stumbles back, his voice breaking as he finally confesses. He admits to funding Holloway's experiments, to covering up the deaths, to silencing anyone who threatened to expose the truth. His words spill out in a frantic rush, each admission more damning than the last. He ordered the murders to protect his reputation, to keep the horrors of Holloway's work buried. Blake watches him closely, her expression unreadable. She knows this is the moment they've been working toward, but it doesn't bring the relief she expected. The shadows in the photos seem to grow more agitated, their whispers louder, more insistent. As Hastings is led away in handcuffs, Blake and Reed exchange a glance. The case is closed, but the shadows remain restless, their presence a haunting reminder that some truths are never fully laid to rest. The Polaroid, now silent in Blake's hands, feels heavier than ever. The shadows within it seem to pulse with a life of their own, as if they're waiting for something or someone. And as Blake tucks the camera into her bag, she can't shake the feeling that this isn't over. The shadows are still out there, watching, waiting, and their story is far from finished. Now turning to the final chapter of this haunting tale, Blake and Reed find themselves standing at the edge of a decision that will change everything. The shadows in the Polaroid photos have grown more restless, their whispers now a constant, unsettling presence in Blake's mind. She knows what they want, what they've been demanding all along. The camera must be destroyed to free their trapped souls. But for Blake, it's not just about the shadows. It's about her father, his shadow forever captured in that cold, unfeeling device. Letting go means saying goodbye to the last tangible piece of him, and the thought tears at her heart. With a heavy sigh, Blake turns to Reed. His face is grim but resolute. He's been by her side through every twist and turn of this nightmare, and he's not about to leave her now. Together, they make their way back to the abandoned asylum, the place where it all began. The air is thick with the weight of what's to come, the silence broken only by the crunch of their footsteps on the cracked pavement. Inside, the asylum feels colder, darker, as if the building itself is aware of their purpose. Blake leads Reed to the hidden room where they first discovered the cache of old Polaroid photos. The walls seem to close in around them as they prepare for the ritual. Blake places the camera on a makeshift altar, its cold metal casing gleaming faintly in the dim light. She hesitates for a moment, her hand hovering over it, before finally pulling out the photo of her father's shadow. The image is as haunting as ever, the shadowy figure standing in the corner of the frame, its presence both familiar and unsettling. Blake's breath catches in her throat as she whispers a quiet goodbye, her voice trembling with emotion. Reed places a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his silent support giving her the strength to continue. With a deep breath, Blake begins the ritual, reciting the words she found scrawled in Victor Holloway's old journal. The air grows colder, the shadows in the room seeming to stir as the camera begins to tremble. A faint, otherworldly hum fills the space, growing louder with each passing second. Blake's voice rises, her words echoing off the walls as she completes the incantation. Suddenly, the camera shatters, its pieces scattering across the floor. The room is plunged into silence, the oppressive weight lifting as the shadows in the photos begin to fade. One by one, the figures dissolve, their forms dissipating into nothingness. Blake watches as her father's shadow slowly vanishes, a single tear rolling down her cheek. As the last shadow fades, the room feels lighter, the air warmer. Blake and Reed stand in silence, the enormity of what they've done sinking in. It's over, the shadows are free, but for Blake, the victory is bittersweet. She's said goodbye to her father, but she knows he's at peace now. And as they leave the asylum behind, the first rays of dawn breaking through the trees, Blake feels a sense of closure she hasn't known in years. Yet, as they walk away, she can't shake the feeling that something remains. The Polaroid may be gone, but the shadow story lingers, a reminder that some mysteries are never fully solved. And as Blake glances back at the crumbling asylum, she wonders if the shadows are truly gone, or if they're still out there, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. Now turning to the aftermath of their harrowing journey, Blake and Reed return to their everyday lives, but nothing feels the same. The weight of what they've experienced lingers, a shadow of its own, casting a quiet unease over their routines. Blake finds herself glancing over her shoulder more often, half expecting to see a familiar figure lurking in the corner of her vision. Reed, too, seems changed, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by a quiet vigilance. The Polaroid may be gone, but its echoes remain, a haunting reminder of the darkness they faced. One evening, as Blake empties her pockets after a long day, her fingers brush against something unexpected. She pulls out a single, undeveloped Polaroid photo, its surface blank and unmarked. Her breath catches as she stares at it, her mind racing. Where did it come from? She's certain she destroyed every last trace of the camera. The photo feels cold in her hands, a chill creeping up her spine as she turns it over. There's no date, no name, just an eerie stillness that seems to pulse with unseen energy. Blake's thoughts spiral as she considers the implications. Could the shadows still be out there, waiting to be captured? Was the ritual incomplete, or did the camera leave behind one final, twisted surprise? She tucks the photo away, unsure of what to do with it, but the questions gnaw at her. What if the shadows aren't truly gone? What if they're biding their time, waiting for the right moment to return? As the days pass, Blake can't shake the feeling that she's being watched. The undeveloped photo remains hidden, a secret she keeps even from Reed. But every now and then, she catches a glimpse of something. A flicker of movement in the corner of her eye, a faint whisper in the silence of the night. The shadows may have faded, but their presence lingers, a ghostly reminder that some mysteries are never truly solved. And so, as Blake stands at the edge of her new reality, she can't help but wonder. What if the shadows are still out there, waiting to be captured? What if the Polaroid's curse is far from over? The questions hang in the air, unanswered and unsettling, leaving the door open to a darkness that may never fully be vanquished. And as the camera's final secret remains hidden, the story of the shadows continues, a chilling reminder that some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed.